Shattered Silence, A Journey of Survival and Healing, by Nanice Munoz, formerly Nicola Nooks. Chapter 13. Mother's Day and Birthday. Setting the stage. Mother's Day and birthdays were the occasions when my mother and I most often reached out to each other. These milestones, marked on the calendar, became rare moments our voices touched, separated not just by miles but, more profoundly, by emotional distance. Birthdays, in particular, were brief exchanges, a simple happy birthday, perhaps with a few emojis and a short note. The connection felt routine, almost obligatory, like a box checked off a list. But Mother's Day was different. It felt like a ritual, a gesture I performed out of duty rather than celebration. I would send my greetings, perhaps a message or a phone call, but the act often felt hollow. Beneath the surface, I struggled to truly honor the day. It unearthed the weight of years marked by absence and silence. Years where our relationship had been defined more by the things left unsaid than by what was spoken. The simple phrase, Happy Mother's Day, carried a heaviness I couldn't ignore, as if the unspoken years lingered in the air, clouding the moment. In those moments, I often found myself reflecting on what motherhood meant to me, and whether it was something I could genuinely celebrate. These occasions, while outwardly mundane, stirred deep emotional undercurrents. They became reminders of the longing I carried for a connection deeper than the obligatory exchanges we shared, a connection that had often been met with silence. The ache of those unmet expectations lingered, turning simple greetings into reflections of all that was missing. A Mother's Day of reflection. There was one Mother's Day in particular, when my emotions reached a breaking point. I had been reflecting deeply on what it truly meant to honor my mother, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My mother had not fulfilled the role I needed her to play. She carried me for 9 months, and for that, I would always be grateful. But beyond that, the nurturing, care, and presence I longed for were painfully absent. In contrast, my grandmother had stepped in to fill the void. With her quiet wisdom and unwavering care, she became the mother figure I needed. She offered me the love, understanding, and stability that my heart had always yearned for. The stark difference between the bond I shared with her and the bond or lack thereof I shared with my mother was impossible to ignore. My grandmother embodied the nurturing spirit I craved but never received from my mother. That Mother's Day, I couldn't bring myself to say, Happy Mother's Day. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. The years of unmet needs, the emotional distance, and the silence that had defined our relationship weighed heavily on me. Offering her those words would have felt dishonest, a hollow gesture that betrayed what I truly felt in my heart. It wasn't about disrespect, it was about finally being honest, even in silence, in a relationship that had been filled with so many unspoken truths. Choosing not to reach out that year wasn't easy, but it felt like the only way to honor my own feelings. Still, the guilt lingered. I questioned whether I was wrong for withholding my greetings, for not fulfilling what seemed to be an expected duty. But deep down, I knew the truth. My decision wasn't about defiance or blame. It was about my need for more than just words. It was about seeking a genuine connection and the love of a mother, something I had never truly received. The consequences of silence that year. I chose silence, a silence that carried more weight than words ever could, yet left me tangled in guilt and confusion. It wasn't the silence of apathy, but the silence of a deep, internal struggle that I couldn't easily articulate. Deciding not to reach out to my mother on Mother's Day wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of honesty. For years, our obligatory greetings on birthdays and holidays had only masked the truth. The emotional connection between us had been severed long ago. After Mother's Day had passed, my mother was upset that I didn't call to share any Mother's Day greetings. She was especially hurt because she found out that I had called my brother, her eldest son, to be a blessing to him and his family. I can't clearly remember whether she called me herself to express her hurt or if my brother was the one who told me. But either way, I found out that she was deeply bothered by the fact that I reached out to him but hadn't contacted her. The weight of her pain was evident. Her tone, whether in her own voice or in what was relayed to me, carried sharpness, confusion, and anger over the missed acknowledgement. It wasn't just disappointment I sensed. It was the expectation of being honored, of being celebrated in a way I couldn't bring myself to offer, because I didn't feel she had earned that place in my life. But her reaction wasn't only about a missed phone call. It was about the years of unmet needs and emotional gaps that had quietly built up between us. In that moment, I struggled to find the right words, not because I didn't understand her pain, but because I was thinking about how she had not truly been a mother to me over the years. How could I make her understand that this wasn't about forgetting a holiday? It was about years of silence, years in which her role as a mother had fallen short of what I needed. This wasn't a wound that could be healed with an apology or mended with a single conversation. It was the kind of pain that had been festering in the spaces between us, growing deeper in the absence of real connection. I felt guilty, but not in the way she might have thought. I didn't feel guilty for not calling because I knew my silence wasn't born of cruelty or indifference. I felt guilty because deep down, I knew that my decision had broken a long-standing pattern. My silence was an unspoken acknowledgement of the emotional distance between us, a silent confession that our relationship had never been what it should have been. That truth weighed heavily on me, even as I tried to stand by my decision. As I meditated on the words told to me, I felt as though I was caught between two opposing worlds. On one side was the world of expectation, where a mother should be celebrated without question. On the other side was my reality, a fractured relationship that I couldn't bring myself to celebrate. Her reaction wasn't just about the missed phone call. It was about the unraveling of a dynamic that had long been out of sync. She didn't understand, and I wasn't sure she ever would. The truth was too complicated, too painful to condense into words she could hear or accept. I was left with a swirl of emotions, guilt, frustration, and an aching kind of grief. It wasn't the loud, messy grief of loss, but a quiet grief that settled deep inside me. I couldn't tell whether I was mourning the relationship we never had or the one we had lost along the way. What I did know was that the silence I had chosen, the silence I thought would give me space to process my feelings, had its own consequences. It didn't heal. It didn't bring clarity. Instead, it amplified the tension that had been quietly growing between us for years. Later, as I reflected on that moment, I came to a difficult realization. This silence wasn't mine alone. It was a shared silence, one that had existed between us for far too long. My mother's disappointment wasn't just about my absence on Mother's Day. It was about the unspoken truths that defined our relationship. The years of neglect, the unmet emotional needs, the distance that had grown between us while we both pretended everything was fine. In many ways, her hurt mirrored my own. That moment, that silence, became a turning point for me. It forced me to confront the truths I had avoided for so long, not just about my mother, but about myself. I realized that silence had been my way of coping, a way of protecting myself from pain I wasn't ready to face. But silence doesn't heal wounds. It only hides them, leaving them to fester in the darkness. And sometimes the only way to move forward is to face those wounds, no matter how deep or raw they may be. The decision to reconnect. The following year, as Mother's Day approached, I stood at a crossroads. The silence I had maintained the year before still lingered, heavy and unresolved. Yet, somewhere deep within me, there was a shift, a quiet pull urging me to reach out. It wasn't a decision I made impulsively. It came from long moments of reflection, grappling with my emotions, and most of all, a desire to prevent the distance between us from growing irreparably wide. It was a complicated step, one that felt like venturing into unfamiliar terrain. Still, it was a step I knew I needed to take, if only to keep my heart from hardening completely to the idea of reconciliation. By then, I had spent enough time reflecting on the events of the previous year. I understood why I had chosen silence. It felt justified in the moment. But I had also realized that silence wasn't a solution. It had only widened the gap between us, leaving old emotional wounds to fester. I hadn't forgotten the pain of the past, and the hurt hadn't disappeared. But holding on to my confusion and disappointment was keeping me trapped, tethered to the version of myself I no longer wanted to be. I didn't want to remain imprisoned by what was. I wanted something more. I wanted peace, closure, and perhaps the faintest hope of a connection that could one day resemble the relationship I had once longed for. When I finally made the decision to reach out, the words came hesitantly, each one carefully chosen. But my goal was clear. I didn't expect to fix things or alter the dynamic between us. I only wanted to give her something I knew she valued, a simple Happy Mother's Day acknowledgement. I understood how much that message meant to her, and I hoped it might ease the tension created by my silence. I wasn't reaching out in an attempt to rebuild what was broken. I simply wanted to fulfill an unspoken expectation, to take a small step towards softening the distance between us. As I composed the message, my thoughts were not on how she might respond. I already knew she wanted to hear from me. My motivation came from a heavier place, the desire to free myself from the weight of unspoken expectations and lingering disappointments. The emotional stalemate between us had become unbearable, and I was ready to make a move, not out of obligation, but because the silence had begun to take its toll on me. Sending the message wasn't an act of hope. It was an act of release, a way to bridge the growing chasm between us, if only by an inch. Even in the midst of my uncertainty about our fractured bond, I felt a pull to reach out. Perhaps it was my way of acknowledging that, despite all the pain, she had shaped my life in ways I couldn't ignore. Or maybe it was simply a way to reclaim my voice, not for her sake, but for mine. Deep down, I understood the reality. We had drifted too far apart for reconciliation to come easily. Still, I extended my hand, however tenuously, as a small affirmation that the bond between us, though fractured, had not been entirely severed. When I finally pressed send, I felt a quiet release. It wasn't a sense of peace, not quite. It was more like a fragile resolve, a faint assurance that I had taken a step to soften the sharp edges of our estrangement. The relief I felt was unexpected. I knew the message wouldn't transform our relationship or erase the years of pain. But that wasn't the point. In reaching out, I had reclaimed a small piece of my agency. I was no longer standing still, immobilized by the unresolved tension between us. I had chosen to take a step forward, and that decision felt like an act of courage. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, about my own healing. It's difficult to articulate the emotions that course through me in those moments. A mixture of hope, anxiety, and quiet determination settled in my chest. In some small way, I wanted her to see me more than the version of me shaped by old wounds and misunderstandings, but the one willing to try. Reaching out wasn't about pretending the hurt didn't exist. It was about showing her, and myself, that despite everything, I still cared. That I still wanted more than silence. Ultimately, though, I knew this choice wasn't entirely about her. It was about breaking free from the chains of a past that had held me captive for far too long. I was done letting neglect and disappointment define my emotional life. Reaching out wasn't a cure-all, nor was it a promise that things would suddenly improve. But in that moment, I felt like I had reclaimed control over my story. I wasn't erasing the pain or pretending it hadn't shaped me. Instead, I was choosing not to let it dictate my future. What came next was uncertain. I didn't know if this small gesture would lead to a deeper conversation or simply become another moment in the long, winding history of our relationship. But what mattered was that I had taken a step, however small, toward healing. And that was enough. Preaching on Mother's Day, the balance of motherhood, honoring both joy and pain on a quiet Sunday morning, as I stood at the pulpit, a sense of purpose settled over me. I felt compelled to address the complexities of motherhood, both its beauty and its heartbreak. The Lord had placed a specific word on my heart, one that deviated from the usual Mother's Day sermon. Instead of focusing solely on celebration, my message sought to encompass the full spectrum of emotions tied to this sacred role. Drawing inspiration from the story of Mephibosheth in 2 Samuel 4 verse 4 and 2 Samuel 9 verses 3 to 7, I wanted to speak to those rejoicing and to those mourning, bringing healing, balance, and understanding. Motherhood is undoubtedly one of the most impactful roles in a child's life. A mother nurtures, teaches, and loves, shaping the person her child will become. Her influence is profound, her presence irreplaceable, yet not everyone shares the same experience. For many, the relationship with a mother is not a source of comfort, but a reminder of pain. On this day, social media is filled with glowing tributes to mothers, sacrifices, and love, but beneath those tributes lies an unspoken reality. For some, Mother's Day is a day of grief, rejection, or unresolved hurt. I took a moment to acknowledge the silent pain that often accompanies this day. I spoke to the child mourning the loss of a beloved mother, the person estranged from their mother due to conflict or neglect, and the mothers themselves who carry wounds of rejection, low self-esteem, or mental illness. My intention was not to overshadow the joy of celebrating good mothers, but to extend grace to those who often feel forgotten on this day. My message was a reminder that even in brokenness, there is hope. Even in the shadows, there is comfort to be found. The impact of rejection and loss. Mephibosheth's story resonates deeply with the pain of being dropped. As the son of Jonathan and grandson of King Saul, he was born into a lineage of royalty, but tragedy forever altered the course of his life. In her desperate haste to flee, his nurse dropped him, leaving him crippled for life. The Bible offers no mention of his mother, leaving us to wonder. Would she have been more careful? Would she have sacrificed herself to protect him, ensuring his safety at all costs? Similarly, some of us have been dropped by the very people entrusted with our care. Mothers who are called to provide love, stability, and guidance sometimes fall short of fulfilling their role. Whether through intention or circumstance, their neglect or rejection creates deep wounds that leave lasting scars, shaping a child's identity and their sense of worth. Some mothers reject their children as a result of their own struggles. Mental illness, unresolved trauma, or bitterness tied to the child's father can cloud their ability to love fully. For others, envy may creep in, distorting their perception of their child as competition instead of a blessing. Unplanned pregnancies, too, can lead to rejection that begins in the womb. The rejection may feel intangible at first, but it takes root, growing into a spirit of unworthiness that can follow a child into adulthood, manifesting as cycles of exclusion, self-doubt, and repeated feelings of being unloved. But on that day, as I stood before the congregation, I declared this truth with unwavering conviction. Every cycle of rejection is broken by the power of God in Jesus' name. Lodabar, a place of brokenness. Mephibosheth was carried to Lodabar, a barren land of forgotten people, a place symbolic of hopelessness. His lameness was not just physical, it was emotional as well. Many of us, dropped by those we trusted, find ourselves in our own Lodabar spaces where we feel forgotten, rejected, or unworthy of love. Yet, Mephibosheth's story doesn't end there. King David, remembering his covenant with Jonathan, asked, "Is there anyone left of the house of Saul, to whom I may show the kindness of God?" When Mephibosheth was found, David didn't see his lameness or his brokenness. Instead, David restored his inheritance and invited him to dine at the king's table, a place of honor and acceptance. This is God's promise to us. Even when we've been dropped or rejected by those who should have loved us, God remembers us. He calls us out of our Lodabars and sets a place for us at his table, covering our brokenness with his abundant grace. The two sides of motherhood. In my sermon, I sought to honor the mothers who have selflessly sacrificed for their children. These are the mothers who embody love, resilience, and strength. Women who teach values, nurture character, and guide their children into adulthood. Their efforts deserve recognition, not just on Mother's Day, but every day. Their impact is immeasurable and worthy of celebration. However, I also addressed a more painful reality. Not all mothers fulfill this role. Some children bear the weight of toxic or narcissistic relationships with their mothers. Others have endured abandonment or neglect, carrying wounds that cut deeply and often persist across generations. These experiences create cycles of pain that can feel impossible to break. Mothers, too, are not exempt from suffering. Some endure rejection by their children, whether due to misunderstandings, unresolved conflicts, or spiritual attacks. Others carry heavy burdens of guilt and shame for their perceived or actual failures, wrestling to reconcile their past actions with the present. The pain runs both ways, often leaving scars on both sides of the relationship. I emphasize the importance of forgiveness for mothers and their children alike. Forgiveness is not about excusing the harm or pretending it didn't happen. Rather, it is a deliberate choice to release the hold that pain has over us. Unforgiveness cripples us, much like Mephibosheth's lameness, and it prevents healing. It closes us off to God's blessings and keeps us trapped in cycles of resentment. Forgiveness, however difficult, is the key to breaking free. Restoration and hope. I reminded the congregation that rejection does not define our worth. Just as David invited Mephibosheth to his table, God invites us into his presence. He sees our pain, our brokenness, and offers us healing and restoration. If you've been abandoned by your mother or by others, remember, God has not forgotten you. He has a plan for your life, and your story is still unfolding. The key to unlocking that plan is forgiveness. Release the pain, trust in God's timing, and allow His love to mend the wounds. I concluded by urging everyone to honor their mothers, even in the face of hardship. Honoring doesn't mean overlooking the hurt, but it's about recognizing their God-given role and choosing to respond with love and forgiveness. If you've been blessed with a nurturing mother, celebrate her. And if your journey has been difficult, lean into God's love and the family of faith He surrounds you with. Reflecting on the message. As I preached that morning, I felt the Holy Spirit guiding me to speak directly to every heart in the room. I could feel the weight of unspoken pain in some, contrasted by the joy of those who had been blessed with loving mothers. My own journey reminded me of the need to address both the beauty and the challenges of motherhood. Social media often presents an idealized version, but the reality is far more nuanced. My message wasn't just about celebration or grief. It was about finding a balance and recognizing the wide range of experiences motherhood brings. In reflection, I am deeply grateful that the Lord led me to speak with both compassion and truth. The response from the congregation confirmed the importance of this message. Some experienced healing as they released their pain to God, while others found a renewed sense of appreciation and love for their mothers. Above all, I pray that this message served as a powerful reminder of God's limitless love and His power to restore what is broken. Perhaps celebrated or forgotten, abandoned or cherished, God's kindness touches each one of us. Conclusion: embracing the complexity of Mother's Day. Mother's Day is often celebrated as a day of joy and gratitude, a moment to honor the love and sacrifices of mothers. Yet for many, it also stirs unresolved emotions, complicated memories, and unhealed wounds. It serves as a reminder of the intricate nature of human relationships, particularly the mother-child bond. Like birthdays, Mother's Day evokes a mix of emotions. For some, it's a time of heartfelt celebration, filled with loving gestures and cherished moments. For others, it is a day of reflection, marked by grief, disappointment, or even anger, a reminder of loss or strained connections. As someone who has wrestled with these feelings, I've come to realize that the day doesn't need to be defined solely by joy or sorrow. It can hold both. Throughout my journey, I've learned that honoring a mother doesn't mean dismissing the pain or pretending the past was perfect. It doesn't require rewriting history to make it easier to accept. Instead, honoring a mother can be an act of personal growth and understanding. It involves recognizing her role, however flawed, while working to heal the parts of ourselves that were hurt along the way. To those who find Mother's Day difficult, I want to offer hope. Healing is possible, even in the context of complicated relationships. Reconciliation with your mother may not always be an option, but reconciliation within yourself is. We can embrace new forms of family, love, and support that fill the gaps left by unmet expectations. If navigating these emotions feels overwhelming, seeking therapy or guidance from a trusted spiritual leader can help bring clarity. In the end, moving forward means trusting in the Lord's love, which is greater than any pain we've endured. His love empowers us to forgive, to heal, and to open ourselves to joy once again. On Mother's Day, and every day, we can find peace, not in perfect relationships, but in knowing that love and healing can coexist with our pain. That concludes Chapter 13. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for Chapter 14 in the next video.